She was 8 years old, alone freezing to death on the porch of an empty cabin, January 14, 2018. Emily Carter watched her mother die at 9:40 a.m. By 2012 p.m., she was sitting outside an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere, waiting for a grandfather who would never come. Deputy Daniel Brooks found her barely breathing. He wrapped her in his jacket. He held her close. And in that moment, he saw his own daughter, the one he lost years ago to illness, staring back at him. But saving Emily was just the beginning, because her mother left behind a secret, a tape recording, a confession that exposed a sheriff, a 20-year conspiracy, and missing children no one ever stopped looking for. Daniel promised Emily she wouldn't be alone. But keeping that promise meant going against his own department, against a man who had the power to make them both disappear. This is the true story of a little girl who lost everything, and the cop who risked it all to give her a future. It starts with a frozen child. It ends with justice. But the journey in between. That's where everything changed. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and really, I'm curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Emily Carter was 8 years old when she watched the heart monitor go flat, 9:40 a.m. The machine screamed once, then silence. Her mother's hand went cold in hers. Sarah Carter used the last strength she had left to whisper, "If something happens to me, go to Grandpa's cabin in Pine County. He'll protect you." Emily didn't understand why her mom looked afraid while saying it, but she promised anyway. 2 hours later, she was alone. At 11:15 a.m., she walked out of St. Matthew's Medical Center wearing the same clothes she had slept in. No relatives, no plan. Just $17 and a crumpled paper with an address. She took a Greyhound bus. The driver asked where her parents were. She lied for the first time in her life. "My dad is waiting for me." The lie tasted bitter, but the bus moved. 2 hours and 14 minutes later, she stepped off near a small roadside stop, a gas station, a diner, an endless forest. She asked for directions. A man offered a ride. She refused. She walked, nearly a mile through cold air that stung her lungs until she reached the cabin. It was smaller than she imagined. Paint peeling. Windows dirty. Porch sagging locked. She knocked anyway. "Grandpa, it's Emily." Only wind answered. She didn't know the truth. Her grandfather, Deputy Samuel Carter, had died 5 years earlier in 2013. No one lived here. No one was coming. So she sat on the porch and waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Cold seeped through her coat. Her fingers numbed. Her lips turned blue. But her mother told her to come here. So she stayed. 2012 p.m. An engine echoed through the trees. A police cruiser rolled into view, tires crunching over gravel. The door opened and a tall deputy stepped out. Deputy Daniel Brooks. Behind him, a German shepherd jumped down, alert and scanning. The dog froze, staring at the porch. Daniel followed its gaze. A small child sat against the door, barely moving. He approached slowly. "Hey there," he said gently. "You okay, sweetheart?" Emily tried to speak. Nothing came out at first. Her throat burned. Her chest hurt. Everything felt distant and heavy. Finally she whispered so softly the wind nearly carried it away. "Mom, I came." Daniel knelt instantly. Her skin was freezing, her breathing shallow. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, I have a child, possible hypothermia. Willow Creek Trail, send EMS priority." He wrapped his jacket around her and held her close. "Stay with me," he said. The dog pressed against her side for warmth. Emily's eyes fluttered. For a second Daniel saw another face, his daughter Lily, the same fragile stillness from years ago in a hospital room he never stopped remembering. "Not again," he muttered. "Not this time." Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Emily's head rested against his shoulder, and for the first time since morning, she stopped shivering. The story had just begun. Daniel Brooks had been a deputy for 12 years, but nothing in his career prepared him for a child alone in the snow. He covered the distance from the cruiser to the porch in seconds. Rex, his German shepherd, reached her first and froze. The girl wasn't moving right. Daniel dropped to a knee and touched her shoulder, ice cold. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes unfocused. "Dispatch, Unit 7 child, approximately 8 years old, possible hypothermia at the Carter cabin. Priority 1 ambulance." The reply said 12 minutes. 12 minutes felt like forever. He pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her, holding her against his chest to share heat. Rex pressed against her other side. "Stay with me," Daniel said softly. Help is coming. But the moment pulled a memory out of him he never escaped. Lily, his daughter, 7 years old, fever that turned deadly. Meningitis, 36 hours and she was gone, her hand cold in his. After that his wife Anna left, unable to live in a house filled with absence. Now this child's weak heartbeat pulsed under his fingers and panic surged. Not again, he whispered. Not this time. Sirens arrived within 10 minutes. Paramedics moved fast, blankets, IV stretcher. Daniel climbed into the ambulance without asking permission. Rex jumping in after him, he held Emily's hand as the monitor beeped steadily then slowed. A paramedic frowned. Heart rate dropping. Heat increased. More blankets. Adjustments. Still slowing, Daniel's chest tightened. He wasn't an officer anymore, just a father watching a child slip away again. Come on, he pleaded. Don't give up. Rex whined beside him. Seconds stretched painfully. Then the rhythm strengthened. Faster, stable. Emily exhaled faintly. She's stabilizing, the paramedic said. Daniel lowered his head and for the first time in years, he cried. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and warm plastic. Machines hummed. IV fluid dripped steadily beside the bed. Emily lay under a thermal blanket, color finally back in her cheeks, breathing slow but steady. Daniel sat beside her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tight. Rex rested at his boots. Eyes closed but ears alert. 3 hours had passed. No family arrived, no calls, no reports, just silence. Then Emily spoke. You look like my grandpa. Daniel looked up. What? She kept staring at him. He was a police officer too. He had a dog. A cold feeling ran down Daniel's spine. What was his name? Samuel Carter. The name hit like a punch. His father's partner. The man who trained him, mentored him, practically raised him inside the department. Samuel Carter was your grandfather? Emily nodded. Mom said if anything happened to her, I should go to his cabin. He'd protect me. Daniel swallowed. Your mom, her name? Sarah Carter. The room went still. High school memories rushed back. Chemistry class. Shared notes. Quiet laughter. A girl he never forgot. She died this morning. Emily whispered. Cancer? Daniel felt grief collide with shock. Sam's daughter. The quiet girl who used to sit at the station doing homework while her father finished shifts. Now gone, and her child sitting alone in front of him. I'm sorry, Daniel said softly. Emily wiped her eyes. Grandpa wasn't there. The cabin was empty. Daniel forced the words out. Emily, your grandpa died 5 years ago. The hope vanished from her face. Then where do I go? The question broke him. He saw Lily in that moment. The hospital bed, the silence after the monitor stopped. The empty house afterward. Something inside him shifted. You won't be alone, he said firmly. I promise. Emily searched his face for doubt and found none. For the first time since morning, she didn't look completely lost. The machines continued their steady rhythm. Rex lifted his head and moved closer to the bed. Daniel stayed in the chair, not moving, not leaving. Because this time, he wasn't going to fail someone who needed him. The hospital released Emily the next afternoon with rest instructions and a social services notice that someone would come within 48 hours. Daniel knew that meant nothing. Paperwork, waiting, strangers deciding her life. He had already decided. He'd made a promise. They drove to the cabin in silence. Rex in the back seat, Emily staring out the window. After 20 minutes she finally asked, Why are you helping me? Because no one should be alone, Daniel said. She hesitated. I'm not your family. Your grandpa was like family to my dad, and I knew your mom. She studied him. What if I'm trouble? Doesn't matter. You're safe with me. She relaxed slightly and looked back outside. At sunset they reached the cabin. Daniel pried the door open with a crowbar and swept his flashlight across dust, covered furniture and stale air. Emily stepped inside slowly. Is this where he lived? Yeah. She touched the couch, leaving lines in the dust. They searched the rooms. In the bedroom Daniel found a photo of Sam, a woman, and a little girl. That's your mom. Emily held it tightly. She looks happy. She loved you. Then Rex growled toward a hidden door at the hallway end. Locked, reinforced from the outside. Daniel gripped the crowbar. Stand back. The lock snapped open. Daniel pushed the door and stepped into a windowless room covered in papers, maps, and photographs connected by red string. His flashlight moved across dozens of children's pictures, each labeled with names and disappearance dates. Cold cases. Ones he remembered working. Emily stood behind him. What is this? He didn't answer. A map of Pine County filled the far wall, marked with red circles. At the center was a photo of Sarah Carter with the words, "She knows." Notes surrounded it, afraid to come forward, threatened, protected Emily by staying silent. Daniel searched a desk and found a folder labeled Hargrove. Inside were reports, missing evidence records, offshore payments, and surveillance photos of Sheriff Hargrove meeting strangers. A note from Sam Reedy, "He's dirty and knows I'm watching." Daniel understood. Sam investigated the sheriff, and Sarah had been silent out of fear. "Mom knew," Emily whispered. Daniel nodded. "She was protecting you." Then footsteps crunched outside. Rex growled. A voice called from the door, "Daniel, everything all right?" Sheriff Hargrove had arrived. The cabin had always felt isolated, but in that moment, with Sheriff Hargrove's voice drifting through the front door like smoke, it felt like a trap, the walls closing in, the forest outside suddenly hostile, every shadow a potential threat. Daniel's hand remained on his weapon, his fingers resting on the grip, not drawing it yet but ready, every muscle in his body coiled tight as a spring. Rex stood beside him, hackles raised, teeth bared in a silent snarl, his entire posture radiating aggression and protective instinct. Emily pressed herself against Daniel's back, her breathing quick and shallow, her hands fisted in the fabric of his jacket. She didn't make a sound, but he could feel her fear vibrating through her small frame, could feel the way she trembled like a rabbit caught in the open. Daniel forced himself to breathe, to think, to assess the situation with the cold clarity drilled into him by years of training and experience. Hargrove was outside, maybe alone, maybe not, and he'd seen the cruiser, which meant he knew Daniel was here, knew Emily was here, knew they were vulnerable. But showing fear, showing suspicion, would only escalate things, would tip Hargrove off that Daniel knew something, and right now, the only advantage Daniel had was the element of surprise. The fact that Hargrove didn't know about the locked room, about the files, about the evidence Sam had spent years compiling. "Yeah, Sheriff, I'm here," Daniel called back, keeping his voice casual, calm, the tone of someone who had nothing to hide. "Just checking out the old place, seeing if there's anything useful for the kid." A pause from outside, then the sound of the front door creaking open, hinges protesting as Hargrove stepped inside, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Kid?" Hargrove's voice was closer now, curious, probing. "What kid?" Daniel moved toward the hallway entrance, positioning himself so that he could see Hargrove, but also block the view of the locked room, the open door with its damning contents still visible behind him. "Emily Carter," Daniel said, gesturing vaguely toward the living room where he'd left Emily moments before. "Sam's granddaughter. Her mother passed away yesterday. She came here looking for Sam, didn't know he was gone. Found her half frozen on the porch." Hargrove appeared in the hallway, and Daniel got his first good look at the man. Tall, late 50s, graying hair cut military short, a weathered face that had seen too much sun and too many years, eyes that were sharp, assessing, missing nothing. He wore his uniform with the ease of someone who'd been in law enforcement for decades, but there was something about him, something in the way he carried himself, that made Daniel's instincts flare warning signals. Hargrove's gaze swept over Daniel, then past him, toward the locked room, and for a fraction of a second, something flickered in his expression, something that might have been recognition or alarm or calculation, but it was gone too quickly for Daniel to be sure. "Emily Carter," Hargrove repeated slowly, like he was tasting the name, testing it. "Sarah's girl. You knew her?" Daniel asked, keeping his tone neutral, curious but not accusatory. Hargrove nodded, his expression settling into something that might have passed for sympathy if Daniel hadn't been looking for cracks. "Sarah was a good woman. Shame what happened to her. Cancer's a hell of a way to go." He paused, his eyes drifting toward the living room where Emily was supposedly waiting. "Kid shouldn't be out here, though. Place isn't safe. Old cabin like this could collapse any day. And it's isolated. Not good for a child. She wanted to see where her grandfather lived," Daniel said, the lie coming easily, smoothly, because lying to Hargrove suddenly felt like the most natural thing in the world. Thought it might give her some closure. Hargrove's eyes came back to Daniel, and this time there was something harder in them, something that made Daniel's hand twitch toward his weapon again. "You shouldn't have brought her here," Hargrove said, and his voice had lost its false warmth, had taken on an edge. a warning. This place, it's not good. Sam was troubled toward the end. Obsessed with things that didn't add up. He wasn't right in the head. Daniel felt his jaw tighten, felt anger flare hot in his chest, but he forced it down, kept his expression blank. I didn't know that. What was he obsessed with? Hargrove's gaze flicked past Daniel again toward the locked room, and this time Daniel was sure he saw recognition, saw knowledge. Hargrove knew what was in that room. Had probably been looking for it. Had probably been waiting for someone to come here so he could intercept them. Cases, Hargrove said after a beat, his tone dismissive, like he was talking about a harmless hobby. Missing kids, old crimes, things that were already solved or closed. He couldn't let go. Started seeing patterns that weren't there, making connections that didn't exist. It's why he retired early. Department was worried he was losing it. The lie was smooth, practiced, delivered with the kind of authority that made it sound like truth. But Daniel heard the falseness underneath, heard the desperation to control the narrative, to keep the secrets buried. That's too bad, Daniel said, matching Hargrove's tone, playing along. He seemed like a solid cop when I was growing up. My dad respected him. Was? Hargrove agreed, relaxing fractionally, apparently satisfied that Daniel was buying the story. But age and loss can mess with a man's head. It's sad, but it happens. Daniel nodded, letting the silence stretch, letting Hargrove think he'd won, that the conversation was over. And then, casually, almost as an afterthought, Daniel said, "Found a locked room back there. Looked like Sam was storing some old files. Want to take a look? Make sure there's nothing official that needs to be returned to the department." Hargrove's entire body went still, his expression freezing. And for a heartbeat, Daniel saw the mask slip, saw the calculation and the fear and the fury underneath. And then it was gone, smoothed over, replaced by a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No need," Hargrove said, his voice carefully controlled. "Like I said, it's just old junk. Best to let it alone. Some things are better left buried." And there it was. The confirmation Daniel needed. Hargrove knew what Sam had been investigating, knew what was at stake, and he'd come here to make sure it stayed buried. "Sure thing, Sheriff," Daniel said, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "Whatever you think is best." Hargrove studied him for a moment longer, then nodded, apparently satisfied, though Daniel could see the tension in his shoulders, the wariness in his eyes. "Take the kid and get out of here, Daniel," Hargrove said, turning toward the door. "This place isn't safe, and neither is digging into the past." It was a threat, clear and unmistakable, wrapped in the guise of friendly advice. Daniel didn't respond, just watched as Hargrove walked out, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded like a trap snapping shut. For a long moment, Daniel stood frozen, listening to the sound of Hargrove's footsteps retreating, the crunch of snow, the slam of a car door, the rumble of an engine fading into the distance. Rex growled low, his body still tense, and Emily crept out from where she'd been hiding in the kitchen, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. "He knows, doesn't he?" she whispered. "Yeah," Daniel said grimly, his mind already racing through options, through plans, through the logistics of survival. "He knows. And we need to get out of here before he comes back with help." They moved quickly, urgently, Daniel grabbing the Hargrove file and shoving it into his jacket, Emily collecting the framed photo of her mother and grandfather, Rex pacing nervously between them, sensing the danger even if he didn't fully understand it. Daniel's hands shook slightly as he locked the cabin door behind them, as if that flimsy barrier would make any difference, as if it could keep out the storm he knew was coming. The forest around them was silent, oppressive, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for violence. They climbed into the cruiser, Daniel starting the engine, the heater blasting cold air that gradually warmed as he pulled away from the cabin, tires crunching on snow and gravel, the path ahead narrow and winding, hemmed in by trees on both sides. Emily sat in the passenger seat, clutching the photo, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, her jaw set in a way that reminded Daniel painfully of Sarah, of the girl he'd known in high school, who'd always seemed older than her years, who'd carried burdens no teenager should have had to carry. "Where are we going?" Emily asked, her voice steady despite the fear Daniel knew she was feeling. "Somewhere safe," Daniel said, though he wasn't sure where that was anymore. Not the station, not with Hargrove in charge. Not his apartment, which would be the first place Hargrove would look. Somewhere else. Somewhere off the grid. They drove for 20 minutes. Daniel's eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror, watching for headlights, for pursuit, for any sign that Hargrove had decided not to wait, that he was coming after them now. But the road behind them remained empty, the forest dark and silent, and Daniel allowed himself a fraction of relief. Allowed himself to believe they might actually make it out. That was when he heard it. The radio crackled to life, static, and then a voice, calm, professional, the dispatcher at the station. All units, be advised. Sheriff Hargrove is requesting status on Deputy Brooks and minor female, Emily Carter. Last known location Willow Creek Trail. If located, approach with caution and report immediately. Daniel's blood turned to ice. Emily's head snapped toward the radio, her eyes widening. What does that mean? It means we're officially in trouble, Daniel said grimly, reaching for the radio and switching it off, cutting the connection, isolating them. Hargrove had made his move, had declared them persons of interest, had turned the entire department into a hunting party. And Daniel knew how this worked, knew how quickly things could spiral, how easily Hargrove could spin a narrative that made Daniel look like the bad guy, the rogue cop who'd kidnapped a vulnerable child who'd gone off the rails. He's gonna say you took me, Emily said, her voice small but clear, understanding dawning in her eyes. That you're dangerous. Probably, Daniel agreed, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. Which means we can't go anywhere public. Can't trust anyone in the department. We're on our own, Emily nodded, absorbing this, processing it with a calmness that seemed impossible for an 8-year-old, but that Daniel suspected was born of necessity, of a lifetime of learning to cope with things too big and too scary to fully comprehend. What do we do? She asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He was thinking, planning, running through scenarios in his head, trying to find a path forward that didn't end in disaster. And then it hit him. The old ranger station, abandoned for years, about 30 miles north deep in the national forest where Hargrove's jurisdiction ended and where cell service was non-existent. It wasn't much, but it was something, a place to regroup, to figure out their next move, to maybe find someone outside the department who could help. Hold on, Daniel said, yanking the wheel to the left, taking a turnoff onto a narrower road, barely more than a trail, snow-covered and rutted but passable. The cruiser bounced and jolted, Rex bracing himself in the back seat, Emily gripping the door handle, but Daniel didn't slow down, didn't hesitate, because every second counted now, every mile between them and Hargrove was a mile closer to safety. They drove for another 15 minutes, the road getting worse, the forest pressing closer, and then Daniel saw it. The ranger station, a squat wooden building with a sagging roof and boarded-up windows, half buried in snow and surrounded by pines. It looked abandoned, forgotten, exactly what they needed. Daniel pulled around to the back, parking the cruiser out of sight, and killed the engine. For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sound their own breathing and the faint ticking of the cooling engine. This is it, Daniel said quietly. We're safe here. Emily asked, and Daniel wished he could lie, wished he could promise her that everything would be okay, but he'd never been good at lying to children. For now, he said instead, but we need to move fast, come on. They climbed out of the cruiser, Rex bounding ahead, sniffing the area, marking territory, doing his job. Daniel approached the door, found it locked, and used the crowbar he'd grabbed from the cabin to force it open, the wood splintering easily, years of weathering and neglect making it fragile. Inside, the station was cold, dusty, filled with old furniture and equipment covered in tarps, but it was shelter, and that was enough. Daniel got a fire going in the old wood stove, using newspaper and kindling from a storage box, and gradually warmth began to seep into the space, pushing back the cold, making it feel almost livable. Emily sat on a bench near the stove, still clutching the photo, her eyes distant, lost in thought. Daniel joined her, sitting down heavily, exhaustion finally catching up to him. We can't stay here forever, Emily said after a while. I know, Daniel replied, but we need a plan, and we need proof. The file I took from the cabinet's not enough. It's Sam's word, Sam's notes. A defense attorney would tear it apart. We need something concrete, something that ties Hargrove directly to the disappearances. Emily was quiet for a long moment, then she said, almost too softly to hear, "Mom had a tape." Daniel's head snapped toward her. "What? A tape?" Emily repeated, her eyes coming back into focus, locking onto his. "She kept it hidden, in a music box in her bedroom. She thought I didn't know, but I saw her listening to it sometimes, late at night. When she thought I was asleep, she'd cry afterward." Daniel's heart was pounding now, adrenaline surging. "Do you know what was on it?" Emily shook her head. "She never played it around me. But once I heard her talking to herself, saying she couldn't destroy it, that it was the only proof, that if something happened to her, someone would need to find it." Daniel felt the pieces clicking together, felt hope and dread mixing in equal measure. "Where is it now? Is it still in your house?" "I think so," Emily said. "She never got rid of anything important. She always said you never know when you'll need it." Daniel stood, pacing, his mind racing. Going back to Sarah's house was insane, was exactly the kind of move Hargrove would expect, would be watching for. But if that tape existed, if it had the proof they needed, then it was worth the risk. It was the only chance they had. "Okay," Daniel said, decision made. "We're going to get that tape, but we have to be smart about it. Fast in, fast out, no mistakes." Emily nodded, standing as well, her expression determined. "I can help. I know the house. I know where everything is." Daniel wanted to say no, wanted to keep her safe here, but he knew she was right. He didn't know the layout, didn't know where Sarah would have hidden something that important. Emily did. "All right," he said, "but you stay close to me, and if anything goes wrong, you run." "Understood," Emily said, and they began to plan. Sarah Carter's house was a modest single-story structure on the outskirts of Pine County, painted a fading yellow with white trim, a small front yard now buried under snow, a mailbox leaning drunkenly to one side. It looked ordinary, unremarkable. The kind of place you'd drive past without a second thought. But to Emily it was home, was the place where every memory of her mother lived, and walking up to it now felt like stepping into a graveyard. They'd approached carefully, Daniel parking the cruiser 2 blocks away and cutting through backyards, Rex leading the way, nose to the ground, alert for any sign of danger. The neighborhood was quiet, most people at work, the few remaining residents hunkered down against the cold, and Daniel was counting on that, counting on the fact that no one would notice a cop and a kid slipping into a house in broad daylight. But he kept his hand on his weapon anyway, kept his eyes scanning, kept his instincts on high alert. Emily led him to the back door, a simple lock that Daniel bypassed with a credit card in under 30 seconds, and then they were inside, the familiar smell of Sarah's house washing over Emily like a wave, threatening to pull her under. Everything was exactly as she'd left it 2 days ago, the dirty dishes still in the sink, the blanket her mother had used draped over the couch, the medical equipment in the living room, the oxygen tank, the IV stand, the wheelchair, all silent witnesses to the slow decline and final surrender. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, forced herself to move, to focus. "Her bedroom," she whispered. "This way." They moved quickly through the house, Daniel staying close, Rex at their heels, and entered Sarah's bedroom, a small space dominated by a queen-sized bed, a dresser, a nightstand with a lamp, and a stack of books. On top of the dresser was a music box, antique, delicate, painted with faded flowers. Emily crossed to it, her hands trembling as she picked it up, turned it over, felt along the bottom, until she found the hidden latch her mother had shown her years ago, back when Emily had been curious about secrets and Sarah had been healthy enough to laugh and say, "Everyone needs a place to hide the important things." The latch clicked, and a small compartment slid open, revealing a micro-cassette tape, the kind used in old answering machines and recording devices. Emily held it up, her eyes meeting Daniel's. "This is it." Daniel took the tape carefully, reverently, feeling the weight of it, the potential it held. "Do you have a player?" Emily nodded, moving to her mother's nightstand and pulling open the drawer, revealing an old cassette recorder, battered and worn but functional. Daniel inserted the tape, pressed play, and Sarah's voice filled the room, thin and crackling but unmistakable. "My name is Sarah Carter. It's April 3rd, 2017. I'm recording this because I don't know how much time I have left, and I need someone to know the truth." Daniel and Emily stood frozen, listening, the world outside ceasing to exist. "When I was 19, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. Children being taken, being loaded into a van behind the old warehouse on Industrial Road. I was there by accident, cutting through to get home from work, and I saw him. Sheriff Hargrove. He was there, supervising, giving orders like it was just another job. Sarah's voice broke, emotion bleeding through. I ran, I hid, and the next day I was approached by one of his deputies, told that if I ever spoke about what I saw, my family would suffer. My father was still alive then, still a deputy, and they made it clear they could hurt him, could hurt me, could make us disappear just like those kids. A long pause, the sound of Sarah crying softly. I kept quiet. I hated myself for it, but I kept quiet. And then I got pregnant with Emily, and I knew I had to protect her, had to make sure she never got caught up in this. So I stayed silent. I moved away, came back only when I got sick, when I had no other choice. Another pause, longer this time. But children kept disappearing. And I knew it was still happening. Knew Hargrove was still involved, still covering it up. My father, he figured it out eventually, started investigating on his own. He left notes, files, evidence hidden in his cabin. He was going to expose Hargrove, and then he died suddenly. Heart attack, they said. But I don't believe it. I think Hargrove found out, think he had my father killed. Sarah's voice hardened with resolve. If you're listening to this, it means something happened to me. It means I couldn't fight anymore. But I need you to know the truth. Hargrove is responsible. He's been taking children for years, either for himself or for someone he's protecting. And he needs to be stopped. The tape ended, silence filling the room like a physical presence. Daniel stood motionless, his mind struggling to process what he'd just heard, the enormity of it, the horror. 20 years. 20 years of abductions, of families destroyed, of children lost, all covered up by a man sworn to protect and serve. He killed Grandpa, Emily whispered, her voice hollow. And Mom knew. She lived with that for her whole life. Daniel's jaw clenched, fury and grief and determination warring inside him. We're going to stop him, he said, his voice low, dangerous. We're going to make sure everyone knows what he did. I promise you. Emily nodded, wiping at her eyes, and Daniel ejected the tape, pocketed it carefully, knowing it was now the most valuable thing he owned, the key to bringing Hargrove down. That was when Rex started barking. Sharp, urgent, warning barks that meant danger was close, was here. Daniel's head snapped toward the window, and his blood ran cold. 2 sheriff's department vehicles had just pulled up in front of the house, and deputies were climbing out, weapons drawn, moving toward the front and back doors in a coordinated approach. They'd been found. Hargrove had known they'd come here. Had been waiting. Daniel grabbed Emily's hand. We have to go. Now. But even as he said it, he heard the crash of the front door being kicked open, heard boots pounding on the floor, heard voices shouting, "Police! Show yourselves!" They were trapped. There was no time to think, no time to plan, only the raw, primal instinct to survive, to protect, to get Emily out before Hargrove's men found them. Daniel's mind raced through the layout of the house, the exits, the options, and came up with exactly one possibility. The basement. Sarah's house had an old root cellar, accessed through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor, and if Daniel remembered correctly from his brief scan of the property, there was an exterior bulkhead exit that led out to the backyard. It was a gamble, but it was all they had. Follow me, Daniel hissed, pulling Emily toward the kitchen, Rex bounding ahead, his ears flat against his skull, his entire body coiled for action. Behind them, voices echoed through the house. Deputies calling for them to surrender, to come out with their hands up, their tones professional but edged with the kind of tension that came from not knowing if the person they were hunting was armed, dangerous, desperate. Daniel yanked open the trapdoor, revealing a set of rickety wooden stairs descending into darkness. Go, he urged, practically pushing Emily down the steps. Following close behind, Rex leaping down after them. Daniel pulled the trapdoor shut just as heavy footsteps entered the kitchen, just as a voice shouted, "Clear!" They crouched in the darkness, Emily's breathing fast and panicked, Daniel's hand over her mouth to muffle any sound. Rex pressed against them both, silent and watchful. Above, the deputies moved through the house, opening doors, checking rooms, their boots creaking on the floorboards directly over Daniel's head. Nothing here. One called out, "Check the basement." Daniel's heart stopped. He grabbed Emily's hand, pulled her toward the far end of the cellar, where the faint outline of the bulkhead door was barely visible in the dim light filtering through cracks in the wood. He reached it, pushed, and the door didn't budge, locked from the outside, rusted shut. Panic clawed at his throat, but he forced it down, forced himself to think. He grabbed the crowbar he'd been carrying, shoved it into the gap between the doors, and pried with every ounce of strength he had. The metal groaned, resisted, and then, with a sharp crack, gave way. The doors flew open, daylight pouring in, snow scattering down the steps. "Move," Daniel shouted, abandoning all pretense of stealth, and Emily scrambled up the steps, Daniel right behind her, Rex bounding out last. Behind them. Shouts erupted as the deputies heard the noise, realized they'd been outmaneuvered, and footsteps thundered toward the basement. Daniel and Emily burst out into the backyard, snow up to their knees. The forest line 50 yards away, and Daniel knew they'd never make it. Knew the deputies would be out the back door in seconds, would have clear lines of sight, clear shots. "Rex, guard," Daniel commanded, and the dog's demeanor changed instantly, shifting from companion to weapon, his teeth bared, his body launching back toward the house as the first deputy appeared in the doorway. Rex hit him like a freight train, knocking him back, buying seconds, precious seconds that Daniel used to grab Emily and run. They crashed into the forest, branches whipping at their faces, snow dragging at their legs, and behind them, gunfire erupted, sharp cracks that sent birds exploding from the trees, bullets thudding into trunks too close, too fast. Daniel zigzagged, using the trees for cover, pulling Emily along, her small legs struggling to keep up, and then Rex was there beside them, panting, blood on his muzzle but uninjured, still running, still protecting. "There!" Emily gasped, pointing ahead, and Daniel saw it, the old fire tower, a relic from decades past, a skeletal structure of metal and wood rising above the tree line, maybe 200 feet tall, overlooking the entire valley. It was defensible, had a radio station at the top if it was still functional, and most importantly, it was the only option they had. They ran for it, lungs burning, legs screaming, and reached the base just as more deputies poured into the forest behind them, flashlights cutting through the dusk, voices coordinating, surrounding. Daniel shoved Emily toward the ladder. "Climb." She didn't hesitate, grabbing the rungs and hauling herself up, Daniel right behind her, Rex whining at the base, unable to follow. "Stay, Rex! Guard!" Daniel commanded, hating himself for leaving the dog but knowing there was no choice. Rex barked once, then turned to face the approaching deputies, his body a living barrier between them and the tower. Emily climbed faster than Daniel thought possible, fear and adrenaline driving her, and within minutes they reached the top, a small enclosed platform with shattered windows and an old radio console covered in dust and rust. Daniel dropped to his knees beside it, praying, hoping, and flipped the power switch. Nothing. He tried again, checking connections, bypassing blown fuses, using every trick he'd learned in the army, and finally, miraculously, a red light flickered on. The radio was alive. Below, Sheriff Hargrove's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Brooks, there's nowhere to go. Come down now. Bring the girl, and we can talk about this." Daniel ignored him, grabbed the microphone, adjusted the frequency to the State Police Emergency Channel, and pressed the transmit button. "This is Deputy Daniel Brooks, Pine County Sheriff's Department, badge number 447. I am declaring an officer in distress and requesting immediate state police intervention. Sheriff Mark Hargrove is involved in multiple child abductions spanning 20 years. I have evidence, recorded testimony, and I am currently under fire from deputies acting on Hargrove's orders. My location is the old fire tower, Sector 7, Pine County National Forest. I have a minor in my custody who is a witness and a target. Requesting immediate response." Silence, static, and then a calm, authoritative voice crackled back. "Deputy Brooks, this is State Police Dispatch. We copy your transmission. Units are en route, ETA 15 minutes. Maintain your position and do not engage." Relief flooded Daniel so intensely he nearly collapsed. "Copy that, dispatch. Standing by." Below, Hargrove heard the transmission, heard the response, and his face twisted into something ugly, something desperate. He raised his weapon, aimed at the tower. The bullet struck the metal frame of the tower inches from Daniel's head, the impact reverberating like a gong, sending a shower of rust and paint flakes into the air. Emily screamed, dropping to the floor, her hands over her ears, and Daniel threw himself over her, shielding her with his body as more shots followed. A barrage that turned the platform into a war zone, glass shattering, metal pinging, the structure groaning under the assault. "Stay down!" Daniel shouted over the gunfire, his own weapon drawn now, returning fire in controlled bursts, aiming not to kill but to suppress, to keep Hargrove's men pinned long enough for the state police to arrive. Below, Rex's barks turned into snarls, and Daniel heard shouts of pain as the dog attacked, defending his partner even from a distance, buying time with every ounce of courage in his canine heart. And then, cutting through the chaos, the unmistakable wail of sirens, multiple vehicles converging from different directions, blue and red lights flashing through the trees, and Hargrove's voice screaming orders to fall back, to retreat, to get out before it was too late. But it was already too late. State police vehicles poured into the area, officers deploying with tactical precision, surrounding Hargrove's deputies, weapons raised, commands shouted, and within minutes the shooting stopped, replaced by the sound of handcuffs clicking, of Miranda rights being read, of Hargrove's furious, impotent cursing as he was dragged toward a patrol car. Daniel slowly stood, his ears ringing, his body shaking with adrenaline, and looked down at Emily, who was staring up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes but alive, unhurt, safe. "It's over," Daniel whispered, pulling her into a hug, feeling her cling to him like a lifeline. "It's finally over." A state police captain climbed the tower, a stern-faced woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Captain Linda Morrison and took Daniel's statement, took the tape, took the file, listened to everything with a grim expression that promised justice. "Hargrove's going away for life," she said flatly. "And we're reopening every missing child case in this county for the last 30 years. You did good, Brooks. You and the kid." Daniel nodded, too exhausted to feel pride, too relieved to care about anything except the fact that Emily was safe, that they'd survived. They climbed down from the tower together, and Rex was there waiting, bloodied but wagging his tail, and Emily dropped to her knees and hugged the dog fiercely, burying her face in his fur. Hargrove was shoved into a patrol car, his face a mask of rage and defeat, and as the car pulled away, Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders, felt the ghosts of Sam and Sarah and all the lost children finally beginning to rest. Epilogue 6 months later, June 3, 2019. The courtroom was packed. Standing room only, families of the missing children filling every seat, their faces etched with years of grief and hope, and the fragile possibility of closure. The judge, a severe man with silver hair and no tolerance for corruption, delivered the verdict with cold finality. "Mark Hargrove, you have been found guilty on all counts. Multiple charges of kidnapping, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The courtroom erupted, some families weeping, others cheering, and Hargrove was led away in shackles, his head down, his reign of terror finally ended. Outside the courthouse, Daniel and Emily stood on the steps, the summer sun warm on their faces, a stark contrast to the winter nightmare that had brought them together. "What happens now?" Emily asked, looking up at him. Daniel smiled, a real smile, the first in a long time. "Now you go home." Emily's brow furrowed. "I don't have a home anymore." Daniel knelt down, meeting her eyes. "Yes, you do. Me? If you want." Emily stared at him, surprise and hope and something like joy dawning on her face. "Really? Really?" Daniel said. "I already filed the paperwork. You're officially my foster daughter, and in a year, if you want, we'll make it permanent. Adoption." Emily threw her arms around his neck, holding on tight, and Daniel held her back, feeling like maybe, just maybe, the broken pieces of his life were starting to come together again. Rex sat beside them, tail wagging, and as they walked away from the courthouse, toward the car, toward the future, Daniel thought about Sam and Sarah, about the sacrifices they'd made, the truths they'd tried to protect, and he made a silent promise to them both. "I'll take care of her, I'll keep her safe, and I'll make sure she knows she's loved. Sometimes family isn't found. Sometimes it's made. From pain, from loss, from two people who needed each other in ways they didn't understand until it was almost too late." And as they drove away, the sun setting behind them, Daniel knew they were going to be okay. All of them. Together. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage can come from the most unexpected places, then share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Stories like Emily and Daniel's deserve to be told, and your support, your share, your subscription, helps us bring more untold stories to light. Because sometimes, the stories that matter most are the ones that almost got buried. Don't let this be one of them.